Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now, this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Ndor and this is what's coming up on the show. TISO Black Star Group this week has confirmed the return of an historic anti-apartheid Afrikaans newspaper, Vrye Weekblad. That's 25 years after it shut down. We'll be chatting to founding editor to find out why there was a need to bring the paper back after all this time. The Support Public Broadcasting Coalition and Media Monitoring Africa wrote to Parliament stating that the election results could be challenged on the basis that the SABC failed to provide balanced coverage in the build-up to the national elections scheduled for May. Well, those are just some of the stories that we'll be unpacking with my guests on Media Monitor this morning. But before we engage with our panel, for all of that and more, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday papers today. And we start with the Sunday Times. Eskom is the front page story for the paper again this week. The paper's reporting theft at 3 power plants, Medupe, Ngula and Kusile, amounting to 139 billion rand is being investigated. Estimates are that the cost of looting, together with losses due to state capture, could reach a total of 500 billion since 2005 at Eskom alone. Now, the City Press's headline is Cyril versus Supra. Now, the story talks about President Ramaphosa having to put out fires and fighting hostile challenges within the ANC. The biggest of which, the paper says, is coming from the Northwest Province, with former Premier Supra Mahumapelo allegedly on the front line of anti-Ramaphosa forces within the party. The Sunday Independent is running with the Democratic Alliance's manifesto launch in Johannesburg yesterday, with the party declaring its intention to take over Gauteng and the Northern Cape provinces from the ANC. The party seems emboldened by its local government election wins in 2016. And in KwaZulu-Natal, the Sunday Tribune is leading with a story about how South Africa has joined a growing list of countries saying no to Islamic State sympathizers. And in Cape Town, the Weekend Argus there is reporting on the discovery of how a 3-year-old Durbanville twin died in hospital after allegedly falling on her bicycle brake lever, but it's been found out that she was actually shot in the heart with a pellet gun. All right, so there's quite a lot to look at and explore, and as usual we have guest editors in the studio. My guests this morning are Sunday Times political reporter Zingisa Mvumvu and Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us. There we go, and they both nod, which is great. All right, now our first story. Historic anti-apartheid Afrikaans newspaper, Vrye Weekblad, is set to make a return 25 years after shutting down. The TISO Black Star Group has confirmed this past week, and founding editor Max du Preez will be at the helm of the publication once again and will be joined by some of the same team members that investigated the apartheid-era government. Former General Lothar Neethling sued the newspaper after it revealed that Neethling supplied toxins to police because to be used against anti-apartheid activists. The protracted court proceedings led to the publication's shutting down in 1994 after it had been established in 1988. Well, to tell us a little bit more about this, I'm now joined via Skype by founding editor of the Vrye Weekblad to tell us more about this paper's return. Max du Preez, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter.
All right, so Max, why on earth would you want to put yourself in harm's way? You should have retired and been smoking your cigars.
There's no rest for the wicked.
So tell us about this return. What's inspired it this time? The same sort of reasons as 1988?
Well, pretty much. As you just indicated, the demise of Vrye Weekblad was not because of our failure, but because of failure of justice. that the court found against us, and we were bankrupt. All know now that we were correct anyway. But I think things have moved on. I think Afrikaans newspapers adapted quite well after 1994 from supporting the apartheid regime to be supportive of the constitution. I think that has now changed, especially in the last decade. I think there's again a need for a progressive voice. There's a lot of victimhood in Afrikaner thinking. I think the right wing is extremely well organized, and they are putting pressure on the Afrikaans papers. And unfortunately, the papers are bowing to that pressure. So I think generally journalism in South Africa is at a fairly low ebb. I think we've been well served by a small handful of investigative reporters, but generally media, I think, are not living up to our previous standards. And I mean, we hoped that this intervention would have impact not only on Afrikaans journalism, but journalism as a whole. Because we're aiming at becoming a progressive voice, but also a highly credible voice, and for the more discerning read. So we don't have to worry about how many children Steve Hofmeyr has, or any celebrity news, that kind of thing. We're going to try and explain to people, help them understand the world, make sense of South Africa and the world. And hopefully, in the same way we did it then, we want to assure all those who speak Afrikaans or read Afrikaans that they are part of this nation. There's an alienation going on by the right wing, and I think should get the feeling again that we this nation.
All right, so is it going to be investigative pieces that you were renowned for back in the day?
Yes, my deputy at the time, Jacques Pau, has since become famous, more famous because of earlier the President's Keepers. He will be in charge of our investigations. So yes, we will do. There will be a heavy emphasis on investigations, but not only investigations in terms of corruption and scandal. Investigations into what is the real story of South Africa's energy picture, the water picture, the education, health. We want to go in depth and ask the right questions and try and explain them properly. Yeah, we will have opinion, analysis, investigations, and we also will have intelligent lifestyle, a bit of food, and so on.
All right, so an interesting setup. This time you're going digital. Is that a sign of the times?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only model that could work for us. And I think it's quite an exciting model. I think if you look around the world, digital platforms linked to legacy media are really making strong progress all over the world. It's the only way this is possible. Let me give you an idea of our model. We only have 3 members of staff. It's Jacques Pau, myself, but now, you can't do that anywhere else. What we will then do is spend a fair amount of money on commissioning people, experts, journalists, opinion makers, so we can have fresh voices and new young voices every single week. So we don't only have 3 or 5 or 6 reporters to every week report on the same things. So that's the model. We have a publishing agreement with Tiso Black Star Group because they have a really good platform for us. They're doing Business Live and Times Live and Dispatch Live, all these things. So we fit in nicely there. But we're not in the same way a publication of Tiso Black Star. We own, for instance, the title of Vrye Weekblad. Tiso Black Star doesn't. We don't have offices with them. We work our own, and we have utter complete editorial freedom from them. So it's a streamlined, supple model that the research says could very well work in the next 2 years. And I hope we're going to make lots of money for Tiso.
Right. Talking about money. So the first 6 editions are going to be free, and then after that you're going to set up a paywall. In this world where people can get free news, can it work? You know, Vrye Weekblad is a brand name, but for a certain generation. In 2019, will people see this name and say, I will pay for what they're writing?
I hope so, and I think so. Yes, it will be free 6 weeks so people can stump. And then it'll be behind a paywall, a strong one. And it's the only way it could work. You know, we can't do Daily Maverick where we get philanthropists contributing vast amounts of money. So we do need to have this. And the secret is, do we have material that people really want and that they would pay for it? And we aim to say, yes, we will do that. If you don't pay 100 Rand or 110 Rand or whatever it is going to be every month, you will miss out. For the price of a bottle of wine, we will inform you for an entire month on your world and stimulate you. And on a Friday night when you go for your Vrye, you will know more than your neighbor about what's going on.
Max du Preez, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We wish you the best of luck with this publication, which comes out from April. Thanks so much indeed. All right, so that's a veteran journalist, Max du Preez, there talking to me about his new publication. New, but old, I guess, because he's bringing it back from 25 years ago and hoping to do amazing things. So that's something to look out for. Right, okay, so lots to discuss, and this week, actually, law firm Webber Wentzel, on behalf of SOS and Media Monitoring Africa, wrote to Parliament stating that the election results could be challenged on the basis that the SABC failed to provide balanced coverage in the build-up to the national elections scheduled for May. According to the statement, the organisations are deeply concerned about the delays in appointing candidates to fill 8 vacancies on the SABC's board before Parliament rises on the 20th of March 2019. After news, in fact, all of that is going to come shortly. But first, just before we get into that story, I'd just like to get a comment from my guest editors about the Vrye Weekblad coming back 25 years on. Zingisa, you were too young.
I was just recently born.
And I want to start with you, because what does that mean for you?
Well, it's good. It's good for diversity in different language. I mean, we know the Afrikaans community is traditionally a reading community. There's a lot of Afrikaans newspapers, which is a diversion from the traditional English, which is usually the dominant language in the space. So it's good, and it's good that they are embracing the digital age. I mean, it should be interesting. I liked your question about whether they will be able to attract new readership. I mean, given that they'll have a paywall and that the traditional reader that they had at the time are not so much into this digital thing. So it will be interesting, but interesting times indeed.
So, William Bird, you and I, we kind of
sort
of around.
Yeah, and with all the blacked out leader pages, what struck me so interesting about what he was saying was that I don't think he mentioned news, and at least until maybe towards the very end, which talks about how the industry has shifted so significantly because of digital, and that he sees it as something that will help explain and offer a different perspective, an in-depth perspective as to what's going on. So I think that anyone who's brave enough to try and launch a new publication now, we should encourage it. Of course, the need for other African language titles is still there and clear. So this doesn't solve that, but certainly more diversity, more media is generally almost always going to be a good thing.
And the language thing is quite interesting, isn't it? Because what I've found with Afrikaans speakers are they're fiercely loyal to things that are in their language. Might that help in terms of this publication?
No, absolutely, Peter. I think that would help. I mean, as you say, the Afrikaans people are known. I mean, I think them and the Zulu people outside the English, in terms of the other African languages that we have, are people who take pride in their being, and that includes the language. So I think they will embrace. It's just going to depend on the content that the website is going to offer. Which I think, if it's something that is compelling, I mean, going to your point about whether people will be willing to pay for it, I think people are always willing to pay for content as long as it is compelling and unique content that you will not find in the open news sites like News 24, Times Live and others. So if they keep to something unique and heavy enough to compel to their readers, I think it will be a success.
Yeah, this paywall or not to paywall is quite interesting. I mean, you see New York Times, the Financial Times, they paywall, and yet in the UK, The Guardian doesn't paywall, and they ask for donations, in fact. I mean, as I say, for our age group, the brand is quite strong, but would someone who's never heard of it before pay? I suppose it will take time to build up, and that's the 3 weeks.
6 weeks. Did you say 3 or 6 weeks? I thought he said 6. That'll mean that we can get access to it. So, yeah, I guess the thing about paywalls is that, you know, they work depending on the model. So it'll work for something like FT maybe, and not for The Guardian, and they've got a very different approach. But also bear in mind that until very recently, if not still, they've been losing more money than we know what to do with. You know, it's pretty dire actually. So despite having 100 million readers or whatever it is, their model certainly hasn't made any kind of economic sense, and that's something that's been pretty common for a lot of media. And so we know from our own media's experience around trying to experiment with paywalls is that they work and they don't work, and there's still a lot of flux, because what we're seeing still around the world is that the majority of digital advertising spend goes to Google and Facebook, doesn't actually go to those media. So for small publications who are making the transition to digital, their models, you know, if you're in a local community, just put up a paywall. It's just not going to be a model that'll work for you. So how else do you then, you know, make your business sustainable? So there are a lot of very, very, very real big problems. But for this one, because you know, they may be offering different content and coming in from quite a niche area, even if their brand isn't as recognized now as it might have been 10 years ago, I think that's, you know, they've hopefully got something that'll work, and we have to hope that it does.
And I would imagine also they can leverage the names Jacques Poe, Max Dupree, Annalisa Burgess. I mean, these names are household. Even young people have heard of these names. And if for no other reason, there probably will be enough to bring people to test the waters. And that could help them a great deal.
No, absolutely, absolutely, Peter. And I like that Max is saying that they'll also be roping in new voices. That's the other important part that we need in the media, the variety of voices and people who contribute towards public discourse, but that blended with people who are tried and tested with experience like himself and Jacques Poe, I think that will do them great good indeed.
All right, well, we'll see in April just how this paper plays out. Older people will remember the print edition back in the day, but it's back and it's in digital, and it starts in April. We'll be back after the break, and will the elections be free and fair as a result of the SABC? We'll answer that question for you after this. Right, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and just before before the break, we were talking about this concern that SOS and Media Monitoring Africa have. They wrote to Parliament, in fact, stating that the election results could be challenged on the basis that the SABC failed to provide balanced coverage in the build-up to the national elections that are scheduled for May. According to the statement, the organisations are deeply concerned about the delays in appointing candidates to fill the 8 vacancies on the SABC board in Parliament on the 20th of March 2019. Now, after numerous attempts, the team just couldn't get hold of Parliament. Well, to tell us a little bit more, I now have the Director of Media Monitoring Africa as part of my guest editors today, William Bird. Thanks very much for joining us. All right, so, I mean, some people might be saying, are you being a bit dramatic? Surely the SABC can get on with the job even without the board of directors fully quorate.
So, no is the short answer. I think, you know, we're in a point of deep and profound crisis, and it's driven by 2 things. That there's a financial crisis. We know that if the SABC doesn't get some kind of guarantee, they will not be able to pay salaries in March. I mean, that's astonishing in the lead up to an election period, and that's where it is now. We know that the Minister of Finance said, oh yeah, we'll make some kind of we'll make a plan kind of thing. It might be that we insert someone into, I mean, you know, we have no idea as to when and how these things may or may not happen. And again, this has been a crisis that the government has been aware of for over a year. Why have they only waiting until now to do something about it? The SABC board appointments then is a similar issue, which is it didn't need to be a crisis where we are now, where we're having to say, you have to act. How can you possibly have one of the critical institutions for a democracy, bearing in mind that the overwhelming majority of people rely on SABC for their news and information, that they don't have any kind of formal institution that can, in terms of its board, that can make decisions because they're not quorate. Again, we're there now, and they're saying, "Oh yes, we've been delayed." Blah blah blah. I mean, really, I mean, Snails could have made faster progress on this if Snails had gone and if Snails had tried. I think if you'd put Snails doing it, they would probably have made the appointments already. So the question is, why have they not done it? And the only reasonable, conceivable answer is that this is a deliberate game of brinkmanship with various members on the board, and to make sure that the SABC doesn't get away from this idea now that it now thinks it's independent. You know, the fact that we had the SABC just a couple of weeks ago reporting on a direct effort of censorship by the Minister of Communication tells you that things have shifted within the SABC, and that's a very, very good and positive thing. But then you have to say, to be keeping the SABC on the edge of its seat, really, where they don't know. I mean, they can say we're going to cover elections, but how on earth do we have any idea of that when we don't know if they're going to pay salaries? All right,
so you've raised a couple of issues. One is sustainability of the organisation as a business, and then the other is what really affects information and getting balanced views. The board, it's not their job to interfere in how editorial processes happen. No. Once the editorial policy is set, they just want to make sure that we're living up to it, right? So could it be that the SABC as an institution could do the job of disseminating information whilst they sort out the sustainability issues and setting up the board?
So the SABC is functioning now despite this position that we're in, but the moment you get into a formally declared election period, when you then have your CEO, who's currently the acting editor-in-chief, if there comes influence from a position outside of that, what happens then? Where's the board to protect and make sure that there's no potential outside interference that can prevent them from doing that? If he resigns, then what are you going to do then? I mean, you know, how do you determine what the budget should, where do the approvals come in, and who protects the head of news if various political parties come and start making allegations against these things? The board is there for a critical reason, and it must be there because it's there to make sure that the oversight of general practices of good governance and key decisions can be made. Of course, they must not be involved in the editorial running of the SABC as previous institutions and ministers have been, but they must be there in order to be able to meet and at least say, this is the decision we need to make and take on these things. And precisely because if they aren't there, that real risk is there, It means that if we go to the elections and there are all sorts of allegations that are made where, oh, but the minister's people went in and did this, and the Treasury went in and they did this. If you're one of the opposition parties and you see or hear all of these things, you would have a very legitimate claim to go and say, well, that very well may have compromised the coverage of the SABC, and we're going to contest the outcome of the elections because of the critical role the SABC plays. So that's not a scenario that's far-fetched at all. I mean, look at our country. We live in the most extraordinary place where just about anything can happen any day. So to suggest that that is a leap, I think is possibly we're being too reasonable in our assertion there. The reality is that Parliament has delayed making appointments despite having known about these things, despite us having written to them on numerous occasions, having said, please, please, please make the appointments, and they have failed to do so.
So what should happen?
They need to put their big girl pants on, and they need to make the appointments before Parliament rises. Now, fortunately, they released a press release on Friday that says that they're going to do that, but we'll have to see what happens on Tuesday, because we've seen the portfolio program towards the end of 2018, where, again, on numerous occasions, they said, we're going to meet and we're going to shortlist and we're going to do interviews, and then they found an excuse every time to shift it or move it or whatever. So, frankly, you know, when they've behaved in this manner, as reprehensibly as they have, we've got very little reason to believe that they're actually going to go through with what they've issued in a press release, unless we make sure that we're keeping that pressure up on them to make sure that they do their job. I'm afraid, you know, they've given the public very little reason to have any faith in their abilities.
Okay, Zingisa, your thoughts on this?
No, I absolutely agree with William about the criticalness of this issue of the appointment of the board. I mean, SABC really plays a critical role, and this is a critical moment of watershed elections that we are looking at, if I may put it that way. I mean, SABC, in terms of reach alone, dissemination of information, it has no competition in the country. Therefore, you have to have an SABC that is fully functional, and the board, the lack of the board, is very critical in the institution that is the SABC. As William was saying, if you have management that doesn't account to anyone, because top management is supposed to account to the board, but when there's no board, then you're leaving them exposed to all sorts of undue influence that may come from all over the show. So it is absolutely dangerous at this particular point in time heading to such critical elections. Therefore, he is right that the sooner the Parliament to do their job and appoint the board, the better for everyone, and the credibility of the coverage of the SABC elections.
All right, gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. Very important stuff. Okay, we'll take another quick break, and when we come back, more on Media Monitor. We'll be taking a look at the newspapers and much more besides. And today we're hoping to go to Malawi. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, veteran journalist Pippa Green will be stepping into her new role as South Africa's press ombudsman in April. Her appointment follows Johan Retief's resignation after nearly a decade in the job. Green will now be serving as the arbiter of freedom and fairness over a media industry which has in recent years been accused of not effectively doing its job. I caught up with her this past week and began by asking her who can come to her office for relief.
A member of the public who is personally or affected by a story that might, an article in a newspaper or in an online publication that might be incorrect. Online, I believe, also applies to broadcasting that publishes online, such as the SABC or EWN. So anybody who feels that there's been a material error of fact, or they've been unfairly treated, or they haven't been given the right of reply, can come to the Ombudsman and get some redress that way. I think last year there were 533 complaints to the Ombudsman in 2018. A lot of them are mediated by a public advocate who is Joe Latahomo, who will try and see if there's a way that they can resolve the situation. If it's not resolved, then the complaint will go to an ombudsman. I mean, some of the bigger ones that I'm sure you're aware of and many of the public are aware of are things like the Rogue Unit story, which was in the Sunday Times, or the Cato Manor Hit Squad story, both of which were the subject of major rulings by the Ombudsman three years ago.
So with all the experience that you have, I mean, you know the tricks of the game. What do you hope to bring to the job with the experience that you bring on board? Well,
you know, I love the media. I love narrative. I love the media. I love the way that the media is the eyes and ears of the public that can go out and tell a story about somebody, you know, the country and the world to people who don't have either the job or the ability to get out and do it. And I think that's our key role as media. I'm speaking as media, but I also think that to be able to do that, it's very important that the media has credibility, and the way that it builds credibility is to make sure that it's factually correct, that it's fair to people, that it tells the other side of the story, that it gives voice to voices that are not often heard on mainstream platforms. And I can't effect all of that in this job, but what one can do is when there are particular articles that might transgress the basic principles of verification and fairness, that one can intervene and make a difference in the hope of getting a more solid media. And a solid media, I think, is good for the country and it's good for democracy.
All right, so that's a conversation that I had with Pippa Green literally hours after her appointment in this past week. She begins her job in April on the 1st. I know, April Fool's Day. She says, please, no jokes about that. But she comes into this job as we get into the elections process, so possibly a very important time to be the press ombudsman. Good appointment?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a good one, Peter, objectively so. In that it's someone who's got wealth of experience in the industry. We know her role wherever she's been. She's not a stranger to the space. She's been a journalist herself, so she understands the industry like the back of her hand. I mean, just the experience is impeccable. I mean, and I think that is someone that we need in that particular space, because they deal with very critical issues that have to do with the reputations of people and the independence and credibility of the media, especially the print. So I think it's someone that can be trusted because they come with an impeccable reputation and experience.
And that's key, isn't it? The trust in the office. 500 complaints last year. That scares me quite a lot, because you wouldn't think that newspapers would, I don't know how many of it is false accusations, etc., but that seems like quite a high number. We don't have that many publications to be going after in this way.
Well, we do. I mean, but also bear in mind they deal with the online versions of them, which are significant. So I guess there's a couple of points. The one is, more complaints doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, in the same way that if you say there are more complaints or charges laid about rape, it might be that you'd say, well, that shows that women are feeling more empowered to report. Similarly, the fact that the Press Council's gaining in its level of credibility and that people are seeing it and using it more doesn't mean that the media is necessarily going down, or that there are a lot of things that people find to complain about. You need to sort of unpack the complaints and the nature of those complaints to really get a better sense of what they are. And very often, I mean, just look at our last year. I mean, it's an extraordinary place, this country, where you get, look at our headlines today. Anything could happen in 24 hours, and our media are going to report on that. And so you know that sometimes they're going to get that wrong, or sometimes people are going to want to take them to the Press Council. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I do think that Pippa's going to have her work cut out for her, and we're going to need to support her in whatever ways we can, because it's things are only going to get a lot harder with the nature of news and the way it spreads, and the fact that it's now so easy to manufacture stories or to put something out and say, this is a press release. You say, well, how do we know it's a press release? Because I got it, but who did you get it from? And how do we know it is from their office? Because we've seen it's so easy now to manipulate something that it becomes increasingly more difficult. And so, Pippa's going to have her hands full, and hopefully they'll have a lot more complaints.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the state of journalism nowadays. Max de Vrye, earlier on we were speaking to him, he said one of the reasons why he felt his publication needed to come back was he just felt that journalism is in a bit of turmoil. And I suppose that this contributes to some of these stories. When I spoke to Pippa, she says more than ever, one of the things that she wants journalists to do is fact check and check the veracity of their stories. Are you finding that because of speed of social media and things like that, that perhaps, or maybe they just don't know how to do it, journalists are jumping the gun a bit more than ever before?
Yeah. No, Peter, my view is that the digital age has really played a role in this, in that there's always the rush to be fast. I mean, you don't want to be scooped by Twitter, you don't want to be scooped by Facebook. Therefore, there's always this rush that you want to be first, you want to, come out first. And I think it does compromise fact-checking in the process, because, for instance, if you've got the basis of the story but you can't get a comment from someone else, do you hold the story, or do you go and say, we didn't find them for comment? So all those kind of pressures, I think they do play a part in some of the mistakes. But, to go back to another point that William was saying about the number of the complaints, actually it could be a good thing, because it would show that, the more people see the institution as a platform to resolve the disputes and the complaints that they have with the media, it may be a vote of confidence on the institution to say that we believe that this institution is the correct one for us to raise our complaints and have the outcomes that we are looking for. So I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, it could be a good thing, and the more the complaints, the better for the institution. But yeah.
All right, I'm going to come to your paper, because you got into trouble quite a bit. And I'm just wondering, has there been a serious look at processes as a result of what happened? Because I think often sometimes we focus on the mistakes and instead of looking at how did that mistake happen and fixing the process. Give us an experience of how one can circumvent and put in checks and balances.
Well, it's quite simple, Peter. Talking about the Sunday Times, I think the statements that were issued by our editor about the previous mistakes were quite compelling, so to speak. They were convincing about the change of things, and you can see there's very little of those things these days, because there's a lot of involvement by the editor himself on the processing of news throughout the week. So you could see that change is coming, and it is indeed being felt. You are likely not to see such blunders in the Sunday Times going forward. But of course, I'm speaking from a subjective position, because I'm part of the institution. But there's really hope. The media is not, it's not all doom and gloom as people like to make it seem. We've always had these challenges. And there's always room for mistakes in spaces like this. But how we come out of those mistakes and correct them is what matters the most. And I think it's not that bad as people make it seem to be. Journalism will definitely survive.
So William, I guess the consequences nowadays, because we're digital, are more severe. They can reach many, many more people, and they stay online forever. Whereas before, you know, 200,000 copies of the paper go out. If you didn't get one, that's the end of it. People talk about it for a while, but the damage that can be caused by bad journalism now is much, much more than ever before.
Yeah, and of course, one of the other things that it does effectively is it arms all of those who are seeking to undermine our democracy. So the moment one of our media makes some kind of major error, and they will, and they, you know, that's the nature of the business. You'll see all of those who are just waiting for that opportunity to jump on that bandwagon. Oh, you see, they're all this, they're all rubbish, they all lie, they're all, you know, they're all in the pocket of white monopoly capital, blah, 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 you know. The unfortunate thing about that is that it's extrapolated from the Sunday Times had poor process, had poor this, this, and this. It then goes to every single media, including the public. You see, they're all this, you can't trust any of them, blah, blah. And so it undermines trust in media and journalism generally. And that is a very, really dangerous thing for any democracy, because the way that you determine what do I believe and how do I know things have happened is that you go to a credible source of media. Once those credible sources themselves are undermined, either through their own errors or through deliberate strategies, then your democracy itself is brought into question. So these things are very, very serious. So it's not just good for business that the media have to make sure that they reduce their errors dramatically. It's for their own survival and the survival of our democracy that they have to make sure that they put a lot more effort on making sure that when they come out with something big, they can stand by what they've done and what they've said. Again, why it's so fundamentally important that you have a board that's able to curate over the SABC.
All right, okay, we're going to leave that conversation, but it's quite clear that, a democracy hinges upon fair media. In fact, Pippa Green herself said that for her big job is to make sure that media is monitored properly so that we have a strong media, and a strong media means a strong democracy. All right, we're going to be taking a look at the newspapers after the break, and we go to Malawi first. Mavuto, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Peter.
Ah, great. Ulishani?
Huh? You speak Zambian as well.
I try, I pretend. How do I say it in Chewa?
Muribwanji.
Muribwanji. And the answer, bueno.
Yeah.
Tilibuino.
Bueno, yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great.
All right. So when I ask you your papers, please start with The Nation on Sunday.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Zikomo Kwambiri.
Zikomo. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we had hoped to get him on Skype every week. We want to get the editors in each country. Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor, and it's time now for us to take a look at the newspapers. And as usual, we start now with this feature that we introduced this month, and that's getting an international view of front pages from a country on the continent. And today we go to Malawi, and we're in Blantyre, actually. Taking us through the headlines there is Reuters correspondent Mavuto Banda. Mavuto, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. How is Blantyre today?
Blantyre today is very sunny. It's very bright and sunny. Yesterday it was raining, so today is a very promising day.
All right. So what are people waking up to? I know that you have two major newspapers that come out on the Sunday. Let's take a look at the first one. Which one is it, and what does it say?
That's The Nation on Sunday. The Nation on Sunday is talking about the story that has been making a lot of rounds, you know, even on social media. This is albino killings in Malawi. So one of the key suspects who appeared in court the other day, he died in police custody. So they're busy writing about this expose that apparently he was tortured and beaten in police custody, which is the opposite of what police was saying, because police said he died from hypertension. So that's the story that they're breaking.
That's quite scary. Murders are not a usual thing in Malawi, though, is it?
No, it's not a usual thing, but these days it's becoming quite a common thing. Maybe just to understand about the albino killing, just a bit of background, Since 2014, there's been a spate of killings of people with albinism. And so far, about 25 people have been killed, and 130 of them injured. There's this erroneous belief that, this can give you good fortune if you have a business. You have albino bonds, they'll give you good, good business and you make money. So there's been a spate of increase in this, and this is what is going on. But no, the cases haven't been going anywhere. People have been arrested. So this expose that the National Sunday is talking about, I think just talks about what has been happening, people dying in police custody. So the case, and these are key witnesses.
And also another frightening feature of the story is police alleged brutality. I mean, is there some basis for this? I mean, this is starting to sound very much like the old days.
Yeah, what do you mean from what police is saying? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, from what police is saying, I think they're just trying to put up a cover-up because, of course, the paper is quoting a postmortem which was done by a South African pathologist with some Malawian pathologists. There were about 3 of them. So after they did that, the examination showed that this person was electrocuted and he was beaten badly in police custody.
All right.
That led to his death, Yeah, it sounds familiar, like the old days, what used to happen. It's only in this case, these are albino killings that looks like there's a massive cover-up on this. All
right. Okay, what's the other paper?
Yeah, the other paper is Sunday Times. So, Sunday Times is saying albino case suspect was brutalized. They're also quoting the same, that's the biggest story in Malawi. They're talking about the same suspect who died in police custody. It's a key suspect. So the Sunday Times goes in detail to say actually there are 3 suspects that have died since 2014, which explains why people that are behind this or the markets where they're selling these bonds has not been exposed yet. Looks like people are busy and are busy stopping these investigations by killing the key suspects.
All right, Mavuto, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for your insights. Zikomo Kwambiri, that's Mavuto Banda.
Zikomo Kwambiri, take care.
Thank you so much. All right, so that's Reuters correspondent in Blantyre, Malawi. Very alarming, and this, sadly, the killing of people living with albinism seems to be something that we're seeing across the continent. Very sad to see that playing out there, but police brutality, death in detention, that sounds like some countries north of our borders.
Yep, certainly, very currently, and certainly something that we're only too familiar with, sadly, in our own country. I thought the excuse of hypertension was one that resonated.
All right, let's come back home. And I suppose there's only one story that shocked everybody yesterday, and the papers are reporting today. And once again, the governing party has one of its senior officials front and center of the newspaper headlines. William?
Yep, and it's fascinating because they're clearly in 2 minds about whether or not to name him. So the Sunday World says we can't name him, then the Sunday Sun says we can. City Press, I think, named him as well. And so, they did also named him. So there's the issue of naming Mr. Cordway involved in this allegation, and then there's the story itself and why the person didn't go to the police and whether she did or some of it. So there are a lot of things that don't make sense. Then there's a press release that Sunday World is carried, and the other media don't seem to have. It's an extraordinary story.
And it is interesting. I mean, I suppose the challenge is how you do this story, but we believe that Zizi Kodwa has issued a statement, and in it he's basically, I suppose, suggesting that there's political forces at play that are trying to besmirch his name and using rape as a weapon. And so people now are going to have to try and weigh up what they're thinking on this, and some people might be wanting to take a position. Your thoughts, Zingisa, on this story?
Well, yeah, no, it's quite interesting, the statement by Zizi Peter. I mean, it's not unexpected, though. I mean, you know, this is what you may call political cynicism. Such things do happen, but also we ought to be careful not to trivialize the issue of rape by, you know, quickly buying into such statements, because that is the most plausible defense if you are in that particular space of politics, to say that my enemies are after me and they are the ones who are planting these things. At times, you may even use that when the accusation is legitimate. So it's going to be interesting what happens in the coming days. I mean, so far, other than the letter, no one has actually gotten to the accuser, you know, to get their side of the story about what really, you know, happened there. So it's going to be quite interesting, and you can see that there was a whole rush yesterday by everyone, and that is why everyone reported it differently. Others have the statement from the accused, others don't, others named him, others didn't, because it was a sudden rush. I mean, maybe others had decided that they were not going to name him for, you know, ethically related issues, but when one named them, and then there was this whole rush, you know, in every newsroom about whether to name him or whether not to. I mean, why not name him if he's already named by someone else? But do you compromise ethics because someone else has done it too? So all those kind of issues contributed to this story being what it is at this point in time, with all these kind of questions that William was talking about that are lingering.
So what does one do? Because, you know, I've always been told that until someone's appeared in court, you can't be naming people, particularly with these kinds of offences. What does one do in a situation like this?
So legally, the point is that once criminal proceedings kick in, then, and it's a charge of rape, then because of the particular line in the Criminal Procedure Act, that's when you can't name until they've pleaded, right? So you would have known that for that awful rape that took place at Dros there, the guy was arrested almost immediately, and then there was a big furore about the fact that he was named before he actually had a chance to plead. Whereas here we've seen this is just an allegation, and now various media are naming him. And one of the reasons for that is that there's no criminal process at the moment. You know, as far as we're aware, no one has gone to the police station and leveled the charge. So
actually
the media have got a legitimate interest. You could well argue in saying, look, this is a very senior figure within the ruling party, and this is a very serious allegation. And because of that, and because of these things, and we've seen the evidence, and so I mean, they need to make sure that it's not a thumbs up. Because if they just report on this, I mean, it's interesting that all of the media have got pretty much the same press release almost, and same thing. Did they pick it up off social media?
Right. So just before we disappear, because we're going to leave now, why is it the Sunday Independent is the only one carrying the story of the Democratic Alliance's manifesto?
Well, the Sunday Times has got a picture of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's two.
But it is astonishing that sort of one of the bigger political stories of the weekend barely seems to make the headlines.
Well, but I think that too. I mean, I was watching and listening to the manifesto launch of the DA yesterday, and what really amazed me was how Musa Maimane turned it into more like a political speech that is not of manifesto, when he was talking about general political issues like they always do, blaming the ANC for 1, 2, 3, but barely touching on what the DA is offering in terms of policy ahead of the upcoming general elections. And I think that is what really turned off a number of people. But then that cannot be an excuse, because as media, we do get the actual document. Actually, this could have been an opportunity to take advantage, to say, since the leader didn't delve too much, this is our opportunity to inform the public about what the DA is offering based on what we read on the documents that we get. But maybe Musi as well didn't do the DA a favor by not delving into the policy.
Well, the document itself, 83 pages, so there's a lot of detail in there, but he just didn't share with the people at the stadium. All right, gentlemen, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Really good having you on the program today, and your insights always appreciated. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And for you at home, thanks very much indeed for tuning in and watching Media Monitor. We hope that you enjoyed it. Join us again at the same time, same place next week for more of the same. From me and the team, have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.